Hey everybody. So as you may know, I've been working part-time in addition to my regular job as a tour guide for the historic hut from the early 1900s that you can see behind me here at the end of the Hut Point Peninsula. And I thought it'd be cool to make a video recording the tour that I give to people so that you could enjoy it at home. It's a very pretty, slightly snowy morning here out on Ross Island, and I'll show you what's up. So there's McMurdo Station. And right next to that is a construction site where a new pier, permanent pier, is being constructed to replace the seasonal ice pier that was used before. And then down at the end of the peninsula sits by itself the historic Discovery Hut. So a little bit of historical context first, and then we'll take you inside the hut. This hut was used on 4 different expeditions, and remarkably, like maybe 2/3 of the early historic expeditions to Antarctica came to this spot where I'm standing now. And I always ask my guests why they think that is, that if you have a continent the size of, I don't know, bigger than Australia, like why would people just keep coming over and over again to one really specific area? And the reason for that is what I'm looking at right now, this inlet that I showed you a minute ago, Winter Quarters Bay. That's like the harbor that is the furthest south in the world. It's about as far south as you can take a ship. You can go a little bit further south and go up against an ice barrier, but if you want dry land, this is the furthest south harbor that there is. So people kept coming here. That's the direction south across the Ross Ice Shelf. So you just go the better part of 800 miles that direction. You'll have to jog up right over the terrain and get onto the polar plateau at some point, but mostly it's a pretty straight, flat shot most of the direction to the South Pole. So if the South Pole is where you're going, this is a really good place to set up. So there were 4 different expeditions that used this structure, 2 by Robert Scott, 2 by Shackleton, makes it easy to remember. So it was constructed in 1902 by Robert Scott's Discovery Expedition, which was one of the first terrestrial expeditions to Antarctica. And they discovered some really interesting things. They were the first people to enter the dry valleys near where we are now. They were the first ones to learn that by eating seal, you can actually prevent scurvy, which is huge. It was also one of the first expeditions where somebody died in Antarctica. Seaman George Vince was lost in a storm, and that cross up at the end of the hill commemorates him. And the Discovery Expedition set a new record for as far south as humans have ever been when Scott and a couple picked men went up onto the polar plateau, including his third in command, Ernest Shackleton. And on their way back, Shackleton got really, really sick, and Scott sent him home. Shackleton disagreed with this decision. It sparked a rivalry between the 2 men, and a couple years later, Shackleton was back with his own expedition, the Nimrod expedition, that, among other things, came within 90 miles or so of the South Pole, another furthest south record. And few people know this, but Shackleton was actually one of the first to climb Mount Erebus, the volcano on the island where I am now. With Shackleton having failed to reach the pole, Robert Scott made another attempt, the Terra Nova expedition, on which he and a few of his companions actually did reach the South Pole, but they had been beaten by about a month by the Norwegian Amundsen, and Scott and his men actually perished on their way back from the polar journey and never made it home. So with Shackleton having been defeated in the race to the pole, he conceived a new objective to be the first person to cross the Antarctic continent. And it's on that expedition that his ship sank in the Weddell Sea, the famous endurance expedition where they had to cross the sea in an open boat and barely survived. But what people don't know is that on the other side of Antarctica, like here where we are now, the other side from where the endurance expedition sank, he sent a team of men to lay supply depots for him that he would pick up on the way across the Antarctic continent. And the group that was landed here had one of the craziest stories of anybody in all of Antarctic historical exploration, because the group here got separated from their ship, like it was blown out to sea, and were basically marooned in Antarctica and had to fend for themselves on this piece of land with little other than the clothes on their back and the supplies that they were supposed to leave out for Shackleton. So crazily enough, they took those supplies and they put them out for him instead of eating them themselves, and just had to live off the land here. And the land does not offer you much. You can get penguins and seals around the coast, You can fish inland. There's not much more than the air that you breathe that the Antarctic continent can offer you for survival. They had to wear the same pairs of clothes for years. Shackleton, of course, never made it because his ship sank. And when he didn't show up, they realized no one was coming for them. Shackleton, after he survived, basically did a fundraiser and was able to get money in a ship to go and rescue the men here. Not all of them lived. So the hut that we're about to go inside, the condition that it's in, it reflects the very last people to use it, who was those men, Shackleton's Ross Sea Party. So let's take a look at the hut itself. So as I stated, it was built in around the year 1902. This is a prefab, and it was purchased in Australia, and the design reflects that. It has kind of like this bungalow style appearance with a veranda, and if we take a look, we can actually see some evidence for the prefab construction. This is pretty neat, but you can see, for instance, letters L4, L4, L5, L5, and L stands for left. So the left side of the hut, piece number 4 joins to 4, 5 joins to 5. The letters are in pretty sharp relief. It's pretty neat. Like Antarctica is like the best and the worst place for historical preservation. It's a place where, wind and pulverizing sand can have a real deleterious effect on the survival of things, but it's also incredibly dry, which is good for preservation of organics. You have negligible microbial life to break things down. And so certain things can survive in amazingly pristine condition. Inside this veranda, there were supplies that were stashed in here, like boxes of food stores. And at times when the ponies, believe it or not, were brought here on their way to the pole to haul supplies, they were stabled in here. Some of this board that's been gnawed down, that's presumed to be evidence of ponies. So you can see what excellent shape the timber is in, versus like some of the metal fixtures are actually in worse shape than the timber. But one of the craziest things, we'll come around the corner here, is up there. That's the carcass of a seal that was killed around the year 1900, and it is just laying there out in the environment and has experienced a negligible amount of decay since then. So I always ask people, like, okay, how could you leave an animal carcass out and not have it break down? Well, I already sort of mentioned the answer, like the absence of decomposition from microbes and the absence of moisture and things like that. But then wait a minute, wouldn't there be like dozens of seal carcasses laying around, because whenever a seal died on the land, it would just sort of remain where it is for centuries? So that's a puzzle I ask my audiences, and I'll ask you guys too. And if you want or have like a clever theory about why that is, you can leave it in the comments. And let's go inside. Okay, going in. Got a little thing here to brush your feet off. Gonna track volcanic soil in. A little bit of chaff to feed the ponies. So here you can find evidence for all 4 expeditions that used the hut, but the one that left the biggest imprint are kind of obviously the last ones to have used it, because they used up supplies they found from previous expeditions. So let's take a look at some of the things you can see. The overall appearance of the hut is a decent reflection of how it would have appeared during the 1900s and 1910s. Some of these boxes were originally outside, but instead have since been moved in here. And after it was abandoned, after Shackleton's time, it did fill with snow and was only cleared later after the arrival of the Navy, the U.S. Navy in this area in the 1940s. So one of the things you can see right away, it's really interesting, is that there's these sort of cut marks in the floor because this area was used for butchering seals on the inside by the Ross Sea Party, who were in desperate circumstances and had to sort of process their own seal meat, and they left hunks of it right there by the window inside their own living space. But they did inherit supplies from other groups. There's a box here. I don't know if you can quite see it. Let's see if the camera will focus. Yep, of hardtack biscuits, which, yeah, there we go. So kind of cool. There's a story where on the Terra Nova expedition, a couple of puppies were brought here prior to one of the sledging trips, puppies born here, and they were left here and unable to be brought on a sledging trip. So the men just left the puppies with some mutton and a box of hardtack biscuits. And they came back a couple weeks later, and the dogs were still alive, thankfully, and they consumed all of the mutton and had not eaten a single of the hardtack biscuits. Some of these box labels are pretty cool. Scott's Antarctic Expedition, 1910. That's a lantern right next to it. They burned kerosene for fuel, paraffin, and actually seal blubber. So the seals could not only provide a source of protein, but you could create illumination and heat. Some more supplies on the side here. Check out this sack full of onions, recognizable. Some tools from modern conservators are left in here too. Lots and lots of dog biscuits. These poles are tent poles here in the corner. And then on the other side of this partition was the kind of cooking and living space. And it's pretty amazing the way that these textiles have survived. And the roof is all black in here, and that's an effect of burning seal blubber, which the last group, who again were in survival mode, did all the time. So it really stained and changed the nature of the appearance of the hut. And this is really crazy, but this is a kind of like a special blubber burning stove that was constructed on the Terra Nova expedition, replaced the original stove in here for the purpose of doing this. And there's actually a little bit of seal blubber left inside of this pan that was left here on the stove, so that you can imagine these guys being rescued, just sort of leaving the pan where it was with a little bit of meat inside, untouched until the present day. This platform they constructed, you can see it's just a box down there, as their sleeping platform to keep them off the ground. Previous expeditions, slept in other huts or on the ship, but the Ross Sea Party, they had to survive in here, so they created this sleeping area. Some of these clothes, like that boot right there, that's actually created by the Ross Sea Party, I think, because they didn't have replacements for their clothes, so they had to make some of their own. You can see a book laying right there. And this is really neat. This is actually a platform where a telephone would have sat that was connected to the next cape over, Cape Evans, by a wire where there was another hut, and they were able to talk to each other. The 13-mile wire which ran over the sea ice and would sometimes just get broken, and someone would have to find go out into the Antarctic expanse and find the broken wire and splice it together. There's a lot of graffiti in the hut, and I can show you some here. That's kind of cool. So as I mentioned, Shackleton's expedition was the Nimrod expedition, named for his ship. And you can see somebody carved Nimrod, Nimrod, in the door right here. This is the laboratory space. It's got some various types of remains. This one's really neat. This is a Primus stove, which looks not too different from a stove you would just get from REI in the present day. But in the early 1900s, the design was state-of-the-art, and all the historic accounts of that era are full of references to these. And this is really interesting, this hole in the floor with these bricks. This is the base of a scientific instrument. A pendulum would have sat there, which would have made a trace that was plotting the effect of Earth's gravity at this location, because in the early 1900s it was known that the Earth wasn't a perfect sphere, that it's oblate, it bulges out a little bit at the equator, and it was of interest to scientists to try and capture gravity measurements in the polar regions to sort of measure the slightly disparate effects of gravity in different parts of the Earth. And that was successfully done here in the Discovery expedition. And then we're back where we started. There's a little meat locker around the corner with some penguin and some mutton, but I'll spare you those. They're not too appetizing looking. Every time we go in here, we find new graffiti and new interesting artifacts. So I hope this was like a little sampler that was appealing to you. This is only one of 3 historic huts on Ross Island. The other ones were built when people couldn't make it to this one due to the sea ice. But this is always the furthest south hut, and it's always like the place you're racing to on your way back from the pole, or it's the last jumping off point on your way to the pole. So if you want to read any of the historical accounts of the era, you're all but guaranteed to come across plenty of mentions of the Discovery Hut, and now you know what it's looked like on the inside. It looks like on the inside. So hope you enjoyed it, and see you around.